This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Now, why do we all pay tax? Well, it certainly isn't because we want to. Instead, it's because we know there are certain functions the government needs to carry out to benefit either ourselves or wider society. Good examples of this are building and maintaining roads, paying for schools and teachers, and paying for hospitals and doctors. Questionable examples of this is stocking a massive multi-million-pound underground wine cellar in central London. So in this video, we're going to have a look at why the cellar exists, a brief history of it, and whether it actually provides any value to the taxpayer. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, the government's wine cellar dates back to 1908, amid the government beginning to attend and host an increasing number of international conferences. As we all know, in international relations, it's important to keep your guests happy. And what better way is there to do that than by serving them some nice wine? Having noticed this, the cellar moved and expanded in 1922, with it ever since being located in the basement of Lancaster House, just down the road from Buckingham Palace. Usually this would be an excellent place for a government wine cellar. It's fairly easy for a couple of civil servants to pop to the cellar when required and bring back the goods. However, on the advent of war in 1939, having a big old room full of expensive wine in the capital didn't seem like the best idea. So the government opted to move all the wine, notably not the inhabitants of the surrounding buildings, to Warwickshire, where they'd be safe. It's worth noting that, in what might be the most sassy act of World War II, they only did this after nicking the wine at the German embassy and adding it to their collection. Nonetheless, after the war, the cellar was moved back to Lancaster House and has continued to help foreign dignitaries get pissed ever since. Now, at this point, it's probably worth asking whether having the wine cellar is actually a good idea. After all, surely it's better to just pop down to the local Tesco and get either the second cheapest bottle or whatever's on offer whenever important people are in town. Firstly, lighten up, that's no fun. And secondly, no, actually it isn't. You see, the Government Hospitality Wine Cellar, or GHWC, is used more of a way to invest in wine rather than simply to procure it. As you probably know, wine can actually get more expensive as it ages. The GHWC uses this to its advantage and routinely sells off wine as it becomes more expensive, or in wine speak, more mature, in order to pay for less expensive wine, or purchase relatively cheap wine in bulk for diplomatic sessions. The government actually has a whole committee dedicated to figuring out exactly what to sell and what to buy. This is known as the Government Wine Committee, or GWC, and was officially registered as a non-departmental government body, the same classification as the Environment Agency and the Gambling Commission. In 2010, though, it was removed from this classification. Nonetheless, the GWC is headed by 4 Masters of Wine, which surely must be the best job in politics, who meet 3 times a year. On the government webpage explaining their role, the government very kindly pointed out that these Masters of Wine are not paid, and the department has no budget. It seems that over the years, the Masters of Wine have really earned their grandiose title. As of 2023-24, the wines in the GHWC had cost the government £795,999. Their estimated market value, though, was a huge £3.803 million. This means the GWC had a cost-to-value ratio of about 4.8. After some analysis, the FT actually found out that not only is this a pretty massive cost-to-value ratio, it's one that's been trending slightly upwards over the last 10 years. So, now we know the value of the wine cellar, let's dig a little deeper and have a look at what the government has been doing with the cellar in recent years. Now, this year, the government sold around £49,890 worth of wine and purchased £49,860 worth of wine, meaning the cellar is up a whopping £30. Importantly though, the average cost of each of the wines purchased was only £24.66, and when we break it down to just those wines that were consumed, the figure drops to only £16.62. Additionally, the cellar was paid back £32,125.47 this year from other government departments that used their wine. The point we're making here is that the data really does back up that the government sells the matured wine and purchases the cheaper ones, and as ridiculous as it sounds, it actually does seem to be good value for money. So let's move away from the financials and move on to the wine itself. Now, for this part, it really is important to point out that here at TLDR News, none of us are wine nerds, and as such, the pronunciations in the next section will make you wish I was hosting a TLDR Global video instead. Anyway, let's start with the weirdest bottle in the collection. By an absolute country mile, this has to be a lone quarter bottle of Smirnoff vodka. Why is it there? Who bought it? How do the masters of wine rate its flavour? Sadly, we'll probably never know. Anyway, let's move on and have a look at the most expensive wine. There are two ways of measuring this, either by auction value or by community value. If we go by auction value, the most expensive wine in the collection is the Chateau Latour Grand Vin 1961, a red wine from Bordeaux worth £3,542. The government owns 107 bottles of the stuff, meaning that they have around £379,000 worth of this wine alone in its cellar, almost 10% of the value of the whole collection. If we go by community value, then the most expensive wine they own is the Krug Champagne Vintage Brew, 1982, coming in at around £8,702. With 13 of these in the cellar, it too accounts for a relatively significant proportion of the overall value of the collection. Aside from value, the most popular wine in the cellar is the Chapelle Down Bacchus. Unsurprisingly, it's an English wine and is used for reception events. It's worth a tad less at just £22.55 a bottle, and the government has purchased 720 bottles of this, enough for 2, maybe 3 Downing Street lockdown parties. Now, we've only mentioned 3 wines in this video, and so far only one of them actually comes from the UK. This is broadly representative of the overall collection though, with the vast majority of bottles being French red wines. In fact, of the 32,259 bottles, 18,038 are French red wines and 3,138 are French white wines. As the government, they're really not all that keen on stocking British wines. Anyway, wrapping up, while it might not be the most important part of British politics, it may be one of the quirkiest. Unlike some of our other strange traditions though, the GHWC actually does seem to be somewhat financially beneficial, helping buy cheaper wines for government functions. Anyway, as you've hopefully realised after an 8-minute video explaining the government's wine cellar, you'll have noticed that here at TLDR News, we're committed to helping you learn. Fortunately, the sponsor of today's video shares this commitment and is one of the best websites on the internet to help you learn new skills from the ground up. That website is, you guessed it, Brilliant. Now, one of the best things about Brilliant is, rather than simply throwing information at you and testing you on it, Brilliant teaches you by doing. Each of their lessons is filled with hands-on activities in problem solving that helps you actually play with the concepts. This is proven to be 6 times more effective than simply watching lecture videos. And what's more, Brilliant actually helps you do all of this learning wherever you are. You can complete their lessons on your phone, so you can easily utilise any spare minutes you have in the day with actually worthwhile learning. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, so click on the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching the video, and thanks for Brilliant for supporting this video.